I just read a report that America is now in more credit card debt than ever before, more than $1.1 trillion. You know, my grandfather used to say, there's no stress like money stress, son. Well, are you feeling that right now? Let me help. You've got a friend in the mortgage business in me, and I've helped families just like yours save hundreds of dollars a month. Seriously, we've helped listeners to this podcast save up to $800 a month. At SaveWithConrad.com, we routinely help our podcast listeners consolidate all of their high interest rate credit cards into just one much lower monthly payment. Would you like to lower your monthly payments? Wouldn't it be nice to skip your next 2 house payments? Are you finally ready for some breathing room and peace of mind? Start saving money today with your friend in the mortgage business, me, at SaveWithConrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket. And if we can't help you save some cash, we won't waste your time. You see, at SaveWithConrad.com, we don't say no. We say not yet, but here's how. We want to be your mortgage advisor for life. So find out how easy it is to finally get rid of your credit card debt once and for all, get a much lower monthly payment, and even skip your next 2 house payments. Let's find out how much money you can save for free at SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 212, non-equal housing lender.
SaveWithConrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle with John Layfield. John, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm so happy to be here. We got Stud Muffin Dave Silva on the other side. We've had all kinds of problems with him this morning. That doesn't matter. We got all kinds of things to talk about. We got Super Bowls. We got Road to WrestleMania. I'm ready to go, Conrad.
I'm fired up too, man. I apologize for missing last week. I was down for the count. And now I hear you got a cough. What's going on, man? Why is the entire wrestling world sick these last 2 weeks?
Hey, it was the first show I missed, I think, in 30 plus years a couple weeks ago in Indianapolis. And I wasn't at the WWE show. I was doing a signing with Ron at WrestleCon. I want to make that clear. But first show I'd missed 30 plus years from some stupid sickness.
It's pretty crazy what's going on, but it is an exciting time in the world of wrestling. And we are back here on Super Bowl Sunday, clicking record. Of course, as you're listening to this, we already know what happened at the Super Bowl. But John, it's Super Sunday this morning as we're recording. You're a half-ass handicapper. What do you think? Is it the Chiefs? Is it the Eagles? What do you like and why today?
Half-ass is true. I bet on damn near everything there is to bet on. I love betting. I love gambling, and I've already put money on the Chiefs. I think Saquon Barkley has got the better running game. That 330-pound average offensive line of Philadelphia is the best offensive line in the league. But they did stop Derrick Henry. They did stop Lamar. They also stopped the Buffalo Bills. And you got Patrick Mahomes. And there is no way in hell I'm betting against Patrick Mahomes. Now, this is coming out after the result has already happened, so I may look real stupid here, but I'm going to bet on Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid any day of the week. I think Philadelphia is a better team. I think the Chiefs have a better coach and quarterback.
How cool is it that allegedly the Chiefs have worked a deal out with Pat Riley for three-peat? How wild is that? Like, that we get to see that twice in our lifetime. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I was really excited. You know, you get to meet a lot of celebrities, and I happened to be there one day when Patrick Mahomes was there. It was pretty cool because we're both from East Texas, so I got to chat with him just a little bit. But what a great quarterback. Come out of Texas Tech, and nobody expected all this, and all of a sudden, you know, he may be the GOAT. They're talking about him with Brady, they're talking about him with Montana, with Bradshaw. That's pretty amazing.
Well, when it comes to wrestling, of course, the GOAT is John Cena, and he was unsuccessful in his quest to win the Royal Rumble. Jey Uso, main event Jey Uso, became the man. And, of course, everybody's talking about what this means for WrestleMania. We certainly know it means that John Cena has punched his ticket for the Elimination Chamber. I'm pumped to see him at another Dome show. The Sky Dome always has a soft spot for me because I just loved WrestleMania 6 with Hogan and Warrior way back in 1990. I'm thrilled that Cena's back and he's getting this farewell tour. And it felt like this was just a rumble for the ages, man. It feels like it broke every record. You've been around the WWE for a long, long time. And just a week ago, we had the biggest Royal Rumble of all time. And that's not like hyperbole. That's the real deal. What do you make of this, John?
One thing about being sick was I had nothing to do, and not like I wouldn't watch the show anyway, but I watched the whole show from start to finish, and I thought it was just magnificent. I mean magnificent. I was sitting there at the end. I just assumed Cena was going over. I'm one of those guys who wants to know spoilers. I don't want to know what's going to happen on Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, WWE, anything. I just want to be surprised. I want to enjoy the show. And when Cena took that bump off and that look on his face with the perfect camera angle with Jey Uso in the background, I saw there, you got to be kidding me. This is fantastic. It was incredible finish. It was so unexpected. I called a bunch of the Uso matches when they first started. So when they first started, they'd stick them out there in cold matches, and before the regular pay-per-view started. Well, at that time, Vince would tend to rewrite the pay-per-view right up to the pay-per-view. Nobody in the back really watched these things. So me and Cole were out there calling it. Obviously, you had Kevin Dunn, the whole truck working, but a lot of the guys in the back, the creative, were busy with the show and finalizing things for the pay-per-view. And I would see the Usos every single night. They would go out there in a 20-minute plus match, cold with no storyline, get the crowd. And no one knew who they were. Now, they knew they were Rikishi's kids, but that lasted about 30 seconds. These kids were so freaking good. I remember going back to Vince after one of the pay-per-views. We're flying somewhere. I said, have you seen Rikishi's kids? And he said, no, should I? I said, they're absolutely freaking amazing. I've not seen anything like this in years. They were that good. I was telling everybody that had ears. And so I'm so happy to see Jey Uso come out and get this opportunity. I think it's just absolutely magnificent, and it's well-earned.
I am looking forward to it. It feels like it's going to be the biggest WrestleMania ever. Of course, we're on the heels of the biggest Royal Rumble ever. And there's big news everywhere you look in pro wrestling right now. We saw Joe Hendry show up in the Royal Rumble. When you saw that happen, I know you weren't feeling that good, but did you just start winding that shoulder up? Did it start to itch a little? What's going on when you
I almost clotheslined my cat because there was nothing else around. I thought I'm clotheslining somebody. I was so ready to hit the ring on Joe Hendry, but it's a great partnership. And it shows the appeal of Joe Hendry. Joe Hendry is, I've said this many times, is the biggest star outside of WWE. And there's some great ones out there. Matt Riddle, Nick Nemeth. Joe Hendry has really built this name for himself. I think it's just incredible what he's done. And yes, the clothesline was getting warmed up.
I can't wait. He's cruising for a bruising.
I'm going to knock his Scottish head off is what I'm going to do. The day the music died, that's what they're going to do. When I hit Joe Hendry at that clothesline finally, they're going to play The Day the Music Died.
I love it. Looking forward to it. This coming weekend, AEW is going to Australia. They've got a big show called Collision. It's Grand Slam from Australia. This is the first time we've seen AEW in Australia. You're a bit of a wrestling historian. Anytime we get wrestling abroad like that and we take a big show like that and we plop it down on another continent like that, that's a big deal globally for pro wrestling. And you go back all those years and, man, there's such a great, rich history of wrestling in Australia. This is a good thing for the wrestling industry that we see big-time shows going to Australia. What do you make of this, John?
I think it's awesome. The Australia territory to me is just fantastic. Jim Barnett did an incredible job down there. He had one of the hottest territories in the world in the 70s. He had to leave due to some issues at home, maybe with a college football team that they were giving some gifts to. But he goes down there and he just sets the place on fire. And then he comes back. Of course, he helps with Vince with WrestleMania and all the things that he did post-fact. But Australia, to me, is one of the greatest cities, greatest continents in the world. I've loved going down there. I loved going to Sydney, Melbourne, Perth. We went to Gold Coast. I mean, people are just absolutely wonderful. And they love sport. I was down there for the Melbourne Cup, the big horse race in Melbourne. I've never seen an entire country drunk in one afternoon. It was one of the most fun things I've ever done. Aussies are just fun people. Wrestling makes perfect sense down there.
I can't wait to check it out. It's always a fun time. I've always enjoyed the Grand Slam programs here in America, and now we got one in Australia. Just anytime we see wrestling pop up in a far corner of the world like that, it reminds me how big the world is, but how small it is at some time too. Like, it brings us all together. Wrestling is almost a universal language, John.
Yeah, we were down I was flying to India one time, way back in the day, in the mid-'90s, late 90s, something like that. I had to go for a press conference to be the front guy for a press conference or something for WWE going. And we got stuck in Luton Airport, the private airport in UK, in London. We actually got stuck in Heathrow. We got winded, and so we went to Luton. we flew out and tried to get me to India because it was very important that I didn't miss the press conference. It was a matter of respect, as you have in a lot of cultures, and that they couldn't get me there. So they got me to Egypt. Then they tried to get clearance to fly me over Saudi Arabia or wherever it was going. Never could do it. I never made it to India, but I was in Egypt for like 18 hours. And I said, hey, can I go see the pyramids? Because the pyramids are right by the airport. You could almost see, you knew they were right there. I walked out and no one knew I was coming to Egypt. And I'm not Stone Cold in The Rock. This is, Bradshaw. I walked out and was mobbed, absolutely mobbed. And you realize how big wrestling is globally. It was cool. I went to the pyramids. They got me on a camel and everybody's wanting to take pictures with me. I want to take pictures with the pyramids. But it was so cool to see the global feel. In fact, I was down in Malawi, one of the poorest countries in the world. We were building schools for kids, a school for kids. We have a school and a sports facility, which about 1,000 kids are still part of that program down there with the Bubasi Pride. And I was in some field somewhere. 91% of the country doesn't have electricity. None of these kids had shoes, will probably never have shoes in their entire life. And I'm sitting there and we're trying to reach these kids. We want to give them job skills or opportunities. But the language barrier, they spoke Shewa. I spoke English. I didn't know much Shewa. They didn't know much English. Finally, one of the kids says, Kofi? And I said,
oh, wow.
Kofi Kingston? Understand, Conrad, I'm in one of the most poor areas in the world.
Yeah.
There's not an electric line for 10 miles. There's not a water line for 10 miles. They're in huts. And the kid says, Kofi? And I looked at him, and all I could think of was, where did they see this? I said, Kofi Kingston? And one of the other kids goes, New Day? And I said, you've got to be kidding me. It was so much the most surreal moments of my life. But anyway, we got the kids. They're all part of the program now, and hopefully all of them are being helped. But it was pretty cool to hear this kid in the middle of literally nowhere, in the middle of deep, dark Africa, and I mean deep, dark Africa, there's no electricity, ask me if I know Kofi Kingston.
Man, what a fucking cool story. I love pro wrestling. When it's fun, there ain't nothing better. And speaking of fun, your man Gerald Brisco has been having a lot of fun, and the wrestling world has been watching. I was actually on YouTube last night, just clicking around, trying to kill time, and I was served a news story from the Tampa Bay area local news where they've had a film crew go out to Gerald Brisco's house to go to the shed behind his house to break out what he's calling his shed treasures. And at first I thought, this is just old magazines. These are just old action figures. But he's got some amazing, never before seen stuff. I saw lapel pins from WrestleMania 7, the stadium show that didn't happen. I also saw, and I can't believe this is real, internal settlement statements from old WrestleManias, old promo photos from WrestleMania 3, 4, and 5. But maybe the thing that blew me away the most, he just happens to have Rick Rude's tights. He just happens to have Hulk Hogan's WrestleMania tights. Like, what else does Gerald Brisco have in his damn shed?
That man is an absolute national treasure himself. I mean, finding himself is pretty remarkable. Of course, finding himself anytime because he's from Oklahoma is kind of tough anyway. But I asked Mr. Brisco, I said, where did you get all this crap? And he said, he was the front man for promotion for so many years. When Vince got the Brisco brothers, what he wanted was not just talent. He wanted access to arenas so that his closed circuit could get proliferation all across the especially the East, because that was the weakness of Jim Crockett. So he got in that. Well, because of that, he did all the promotions. So he got all the guys with him that would do stuff. They'd hand him stuff and he just collected this stuff for years. It's amazing what all he has.
I can't wait to see more about it. It's Shed Treasures exclusively at adfreeshows.com. I can't believe this is a thing. We've already got a new series with Mr. Brisco talking about and breaking down what he found. We kicked it off with a 1995 Royal Rumble chair 30 years ago. It's all available now at adfreeshows.com. Let's take a listen.
He can get him in a damn chair, went back. And if you watch the video, my son, Wes Brisco, is sitting right behind LT. And that's how I ended up with the chair. But LT, Wes said, he's behind it, and I'm promoted. I gave my son second row seat right behind LT. So, but you know what? I knew the camera would be on it.
How about that? So you do have the chair. We'll make sure we get some pictures of it shot up there. But that was my next question was, how did you end up with the chair that Lawrence Taylor went through? And as a promoter, just strategically planning your son right there. I'm sure that just happened to be a coincidence, right?
It was total coincidence. He said, look at it. That's the chair the LT went to. I know he was right in front of me. I said, well, go over and grab it if you want it. So we took it out of the garbage bin that was going to be dumped in the garbage the next morning. And I put it through in the back of my truck, and we brought it home, and it's been in my house ever since.
Decades worth of the coolest and rarest memorabilia. If you're a wrestling fan, if you're a WrestleMania fan, if you're a WWE fan, if you like old ticket stubs or classic posters or anything else, Mr. Brisco has it. And we're going to have some fun, I guess, excavating it. Go check it out at Shed Treasures at adfreeshows.com. John, we're finally here. We were supposed to do this show last week. I'm excited to talk about it with you today. Our topic is going to be tag teams, and we've bounced around and done some personality profiles and highlighted some individual matches. But I really wanted to talk about tag teams because I do feel like, tag teams have gone in and out of fashion throughout wrestling. Why do you think that is? And do you have a preference? Because I think some of mine and your favorites, whether it's Bobby Eaton or it's Arn Anderson, or even a guy like Ron Simmons, who you may not think of being a tag team specialist, but you think about the run with Doom and with APA, and there was the whole Nation of Domination thing. There is a real market for tag team wrestling, but it feels like at different times they maybe fall out of favor. We've heard that Jim Crockett Promotions was a tag team promotions. We've also heard that, for whatever reason, and maybe it was business, Vince was not always keen on tag teams. What do you think about tag team wrestling? Does it have a place in 2025, or is it passé now?
I don't think it's passé. You mentioned about Vince and business. I've never heard him say that, but he always would say, I can pay 4 people or I can pay 2 people. Yes. And that was the difference between tag teams and singles matches. And I assume that's all true, and I don't know how serious Vince was about that because he always had some great tag teams. I don't think it's passé. I think a good tag team is something that people just love to see. You need a variety show, and that's what wrestling is. And with the variety show, you can do things like stick Goldust with Booker. You can do things like stick Matt Riddle with Randy Orton, and come up with some really off-the-wall tag teams that are very, very entertaining. We had Riddle on our show recently with Mr. Brisco, and one thing I thought that tag team did was, in fact, I think the show's going to air next week. One thing that did was extend Randy's career. He needed it for his back, but also it just kind of took him out of the main event look for a while and put him in this very entertaining tag team, kept his character either as hot or hotter than it was, and then you get him back. And I think that's what you can do a lot with guys. You look at the Mega Powers. You look at guys that end up in tag teams. Look at the Rock and Sock Connection. I think you can do a lot of things to extend careers for singles wrestlers while also providing incredible entertainment. And all of a sudden you got the Rock and Sock going against, Edge and Christian, going against the Brothers of Destruction, going against the Hardy Boys, the Dudleys. You got some great matchups out of this because of tag teams.
I'm excited for us to talk about your experience with tag teams. But before we do, I do want to ask, when you first envisioned yourself getting into the business, did you have a tag team that you looked up to? Like as a kid, my favorite tag team was the Steiner brothers. Did you have a favorite tag team as a kid?
No, I didn't. I liked the Von Erich boys because remember when they debuted, and obviously I loved the Freebirds and that whole rivalry between, but I was always kind of a singles guy. I loved Fritz. I loved Brody. I loved Stan when he came through. I loved Kerry by himself, Kevin by himself. I really like the big singles guys, and just a matter of preference. If I'd have grown up in the Carolinas, maybe that'd have been different. But I just love the appeal of the big single star. That to me, I always thought that was the kind of the cool thing about wrestling. That being said, one of my best experiences I've ever had, I was in high school or college, must have been college because I think I had a little money. I had money for a ticket, I think. So I went to Reunion Arena and somebody got me tickets. And Bill Watts brought in the Road Warriors. And I remember to this day, that's 40 years ago, the feeling I got when those Road Warriors came out. I can't remember who Bill Watts was facing. But anyway, he said, why you need a baseball bat if you're so tough? He goes, I don't need a bat. I got something better. And all of a sudden that Road Warrior music hit. And I remember being this teenage kid thinking, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. The Road Warriors coming out. It's just that Road Warrior pop. That's no BS. That thing was legit. When people talk about tag team wrestlers, I always say it's like talking about great commentators. What they're saying is who's really behind Bobby Heenan. When talking about great tag team wrestlers, they're talking about who is second behind the Road Warriors. I thought they were that good.
I do want to ask you, when you were first breaking in, I imagine you had some early tag team matches. Who were some of your early tag team matches with?
They put me with Duncum right away, Bobby Duncum Jr. Bobby, he was there trying to, I guess, make it in wrestling. He played a little football, and I don't know if they put me with Bobby first or Bart first. I can't remember what the progression was. Me and Bobby were together pretty quick. We were the Texas Mustangs in Japan. We had a good following, and we were going to end up going to WCW or somewhere pretty quick. And Bobby's dad wanted him to play more football, and Bobby did too. So it's not just like Bobby, was following his dad's command. That was not the case. Bobby wanted to play more football, but when he did, he played another year of arena football, and he had hurt his shoulder and ended up having several surgeries because of that, and killed our run and really hurt Bobby in wrestling as well. And I came back later, and he was with Stan for quite a while, but that's what ended me and Bobby.
Ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. You can lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with Factor Keto meals. That's based on randomized controlled clinical trials with Factor Keto. Of course, your results will vary depending on your diet and exercise, but with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored for your goals. You can choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. And we have absolutely fallen in love with Factor at my house. My wife and I absolutely knock it out. They've got something for everybody, whether it's bulking season or you're trying to drop some LBs or you just want great food and you just want to save time and money. You can eat smart with Factor. So get started at factormeals.com/wrestle50off. Use our code wrestle50off and you'll get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code wrestle50off at factormeals.com/wrestle50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Hey, let's talk a little bit about Dick Murdoch. I think you spent some time early on tagging with him too, right? Any Dick Murdoch stories you can share?
My God, do I? Before I do, I forgot one thing about the tag teams. When I first got down to Texas, I don't remember if they put me with Bobby first or with Black Bart first, but one of the reasons they stick you with a guy like Black Bart is to train you on the road. That's why a lot of people thought Black Bart trained me, which he did. Brad Rogans is the one that trained me, actually officially trained me. But Bart did that with Dustin Runnels. Bud did that with me. A lot of times you get stuck. That's why a young guy gets stuck with an old guy, is kind of to learn. With Murdoch, I'm not sure why I got stuck with Murdoch. Maybe it was my penance. Actually, it was one of the best few months or whatever it was in my life. Murdoch was, as Jim Cornette would say, Murdoch is to wrestling what a trick shot artist is to pool. Dick Murdoch could get there in the damnedest way you've ever seen. I've seen Dick Murdoch go out there and turn heel in a match, turn babyface in a match, turn heel in a match just because he could. Dick would get out there every night, tell me the same thing. He goes, "All right, kid, go ahead and start the match. When it turns to shit, tag me in. I'll straighten it out for you." And that was Dick every single night wearing his University of Texas jacket. Never went to West Texas, by the way. He played in all the alumni games, but he was such a legend in West Texas that people assumed he went to West Texas.
I love that. I know
I'll
you.
tell you a great story about Dick. Dick never let me drive, so I would have to we were coming back from Amarillo one time down 287. I think it's 287 through Wichita Falls and Vernon, and Murdoch. I've got to hand him Coors Lights, and I got to hand them to him like this. But I finally figured out if the mouth wasn't to him, he would throw it out the window. I didn't know that for a while. I couldn't figure out why he's throwing every other beer out the window. But I had to hand the mouth to him. Just Dick, messing with me. So we're driving. That road's boring. He's singing "Take Me Drunk, I'm Home," which is a song that him and Dusty recorded. And by Six Pack Productions, it was god-awful. And I'm sitting there, and I'm in hell. And finally I said, "Hey, Dick, back there." And Dick pulls the truck over. He goes, "You going to talk the whole fucking trip?" And I said, well, I guess not. And then we drove the next 3 hours, and that was it. So, video, I loved it. Murdoch was the best. And so Murdoch used to pick me up. Me and Duncum lived in the hood, and I mean in the hood. We always said you had to have a weapon to get into the apartment complex. And if you didn't have one, they'd check you and give you one. It was that bad. We heard gunshots several nights, but that's all we could afford. So Murdoch picks me up one morning. We're going up like to Lawton or Fort Steele, Oklahoma or somewhere. And Dick looks terrible, much more so than normal. As Black Bart used to say, you look like an upside down light bulb. And, white body, big belly, little bitty arms, tough as he could be. Murdoch says, you're driving, kid. So I get in there, and I've never driven. It was his truck, pickup truck. And so I'm driving, and I said, Dick, you need me to pull over? I could tell he is sick. I mean, sick. And he goes, no, keep driving. I said, okay. So we drove a little further. I said, Dick, you need me to pull over? And he said, no. Said, okay. So we drive a little further. We get up to almost to the Red River going into Oklahoma. And I said, Dick, are you sure you don't need me to pull over? And he goes, go across the river. We drove across the river. Dick got out, threw up all over Oklahoma, got back in the truck and goes, don't ever throw up in Texas, kid.
Oh, God. What a great story.
And I told him, I said, Dick, whatever I was hoping you would be, you are. That's the greatest thing. That's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Don't ever throw up in Texas. He literally suffered for 2 or 3 hours just to do that.
Oh, my God. What a great story. Only in wrestling. Did you ever spend any time tagging in Japan?
Oh, yeah, with Bob Orton. Bob Orton I tagged with a lot. Me and Duncum went over there first. I tagged with Booker over there. Tagged with Booker in Japan and Korea. But then Bob Orton was my tag team partner over there. I mean, there was a guy who was main event at WrestleMania 1, and all of a sudden I'm his tag team partner. That's when Bob famously asked me, if you know the story, it's famous. If not, you don't care. He says, hey, kid, some of the things you do is good. He goes, some of it makes no sense. He goes, how long you been working? And I said, a few months, sir. He goes, no, not how long you been in Japan. How long you been working? I said, a few months, sir. He goes, the fuck are you doing here? So I said, I have no idea. I got booked because Kendo Nagasaki saw me in Texas, and he thought I'd been working for years. He knew Brad Reingens had trained me, who had this great name. So I get booked in Japan way before I'm ready. I had no business being over there. Thank God I'm with Bob Orton. And Bob then started taking me to the mats before the shows. And he showed me sugar holds and hook holds and things like that. So get me through the night. He explained to me how they're blowing me up. And then, they wouldn't, I was this big young kid. And so there's no reason for them to try me right off the bat. They'd blow me up and then just stretch me, beat me up with chairs and everything. So Bob would show me how they were doing it, how they were blowing me up. And then by the end of the tour, I'd figured it all out. And all thanks to Bob Orton. We were there one day, and Bob says, I'll see you in a couple days, kid. And I said, what do you mean see me in a couple days? He goes, I can't go to that island. And I said, what do you mean? We're going to somewhere like Shikoku, the easterly island or something. There's 4 islands, Honshu, Kumamoto, and Hokkaido up north. I think we're going to Shikoku. I think that's where it was. It was an easterly island, but I think it was Shikoku. And I said, what do you mean you can't go to an island? You can't go to the whole island? He goes, no, I got a mafia hit on me.
Wait. What does that mean? Are you saying Yakuza? What
Yakuza put a mafia hit on Bob Orton Jr. You heard that 100% correct. So Bob is there. He's had a little to drink one night. And, Bob was a tough, salty dude. Bob didn't start fights, but Bob wouldn't back down from nothing. And some mafia guy smarted off to him and, drunk and all it was. And Bob slaps him. Apparently slapped the piss out of him. Enough that he got a mafia hit put on him. Bob Orton Jr. had a mafia hit put on him. Yeah, 100%. And Orton was like, I don't care. I'll go back. What are they going to do? Kill me? I go, yeah, Bob, they might. But apparently that mafia in that area told Orton that he can't come back. And so we would drop him off at some little bed and breakfast, which imagine how boring that was. I mean, you had no English TV. You're in a place that nobody spoke English. We'd leave him there for a couple of days and come back, and there's Bob standing there with his bag, and we'd pick him up and go somewhere else.
Man, what a wild story.
I mean, people talk about, hey, the times were wild in my day. I'll put some of these stories up against any of them. Bob Orton that man was legit. He was a tough dude. But yeah, he had a mafia hit put on him. He couldn't go to the whole island. We'd have to leave him in. I can't remember where it was. Maybe in Nagoya. I can't remember where it was. It was a city on the coast, obviously, before we crossed over to the island because Bob couldn't go there because the mafia said they'd kill him.
Well, we're talking about tag teams. You know, there's been a tag team that has been synonymous for most wrestling fans here in America for, 40 years now. Did you ever tag or work against, rather, the Rock and Roll Express? Did you ever cross paths with them?
Oh, yeah. Me and Killer Tim Brooks tagged with him. I mean, talk about having a great heel, the perfect heel against the Rock and Roll guys. But I mean, Ricky and Robert were fantastic. I mean, fantastic. It was such an honor to work with them. Ricky tells a great story, and it's all 100% true. I hit him with a tackle coming off the ropes when I first worked with him. And understand, Conrad, I didn't know how to work. All I know, I mean, in Texas, everything was stiff. And I go to Japan, and it's stiffer. And so I'm working with Ricky and Robert, who were light as they can be. And I hit Ricky with a tackle. Excuse my cough. I'm dying. And then maybe my last show, I may not make it through, actually. I'm going to have Dave Silva be my only pallbearer. He's going to have to carry me by himself all the way to the grave. And I hit Ricky with a tackle. And I knocked him all the way through the ropes. So Ricky tells Robert, he tells me this later. He goes, pull this big sumbitch off me. Ricky gets in the ring. He says, shoot me in. He goes, come in. And he didn't tell me what to hit him with. He punches me right in the mouth. And I mean, bam, right in the freaking mouth. Well, I know I've done something wrong, but I don't know what. I'm new to the business. And I've got this legend here that's obviously very mad at me. And I don't know why. And he just punched me right in the mouth. And I looked at him, and my mouth's bloody. And I said, what'd you do that for? Literally, that's all I said in the ring. And he goes, because I'm a dumb son of a bitch. He tagged Robert and got out of the ring.
Oh, my God. What a great story.
Yeah, he literally told Robert, pull this big son of a bitch off of me. He punched me square in the freaking mouth. And what am I going to do, fight a legend? I knew I'd done something wrong, but I didn't know what it was. All I could say was, what'd you do that for? Because I'm stupid. He tagged out. Ricky and Robert were awesome, man. They were God's gift to wrestling, man. They were so good.
That's what I wanted to ask you about is, they were branded at the time as being tag team specialists. The idea being, okay, there might not be the biggest guys in the locker room, but they're going to do quick tags and a lot of double team maneuvers. And they really innovated a new style. Of course, their series of matches with the Midnight Express just became absolute legendary matches. What was it that did you learn anything from working with the Rock and Roll Express, or does it not transfer because the styles were different and the sizes were different? Or can you pick up something from a tag team like the Rock and Roll Express?
You certainly can pick up something from a tag team like that, but it's kind of like working with an Eddie Guerrero or Shawn Michaels. Just because you understand what they're doing doesn't mean you can replicate it. They're really good at what they do. So just because you think, okay, I know how they did that spot, you try to do the same spot, it just doesn't work as well because you're just not as good. And Ricky and Robert, to me, Ricky told me one day, and I love Ricky and his son, Kerry. What a wonderful young man. He told me one day, he goes, the difference between me and you? And I said, what? And he said, contract. And I said, yeah, you're right. Ricky and Robert made their huge name down in the Carolinas. And it's one thing I hate. You got a guy like Tommy Wildfire Rich. You got a guy like Ricky and Robert who made a ton of money for the day. But if they'd have been around the Attitude Era, they'd have made 5, 10x that. Just like the Attitude Era guys that are around now, they'd make, 5, 10x that. You hate it for Ricky and Robert. I know they do a lot of stuff. They do a lot of signings and a lot of stuff. Those guys should have been making millions somewhere. And they made, huge amounts of money for where they were. But as Ricky said, the difference was the contract. You wish those guys came on. You realize how lucky guys like me were to be there in the Attitude Era when The Rock and Steve got hot and our salaries were so much higher. You look at these guys like them and Wildfire, and man, there weren't hotter teams or hotter babyface in the country than those guys.
It is interesting to think before, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels came to the WWF and became the Rockers. In an alternate universe in, say, 1984 or 1985, if Ricky and Robert had went to work for Vince, man, everybody's lives look a little different, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Steve Simpson, is part of the Simpson brothers. Their dad was the great promoter down in South Africa. Steve had a chance to go like at 86 or something like that to WWE. He would have been a megastar. But Fritz told him, he goes, you're my guy. I'm going to take care of you. You're a part of family. And Steve, I think, regrets to this day that he didn't go because I mean, the world would change with that. You know, same with Ricky and Robert. I mean, it could have been a different dynamic. Those guys end up at WrestleManias, the first WrestleManias. Those guys they would have printed money. Not that they didn't make a lot of money where they were. They were the biggest stars there was. But in a bigger fishbowl, they'd have been huge.
What they never really had was the marketing machine behind it for all the merch and all that. I mean, certainly they had a Rock and Roll Express t-shirt, but there were prototypes of action figures that were never released. And there was just a much bigger opportunity with the WWF outside of just selling wrestling tickets. And in Mid-Atlantic, that's what they were all about, man. They were selling wrestling tickets, but Vince had a vision that was bigger than that. And that didn't always apply to every tag team. And you and I had a conversation years ago, back when Bruce and I were first doing live podcasts, and you were gracious enough to be a guest for us. I talked about Phil LaFon and Doug Furnas. Furnas and LaFon, I feel like, is one of the great missed opportunities in the WWF. And I know that, you know, maybe they didn't have the right pizzazz for the Attitude Era, but you want to talk about a badass tag team. I love their stuff. They were here in the WWF for a cup of coffee, but I know you feel similarly. That was a great tag team, wasn't it?
That was a great tag team, and they were so good at everything they did. I mean, Furnas was a world-class strong guy. I mean, I remember Barry Windham called a spot one time. He goes, "Do 2 leapfrogs, and I'm not ducking one bit." And that freaking Furnas would leap out of the freaking gym. I mean, he was an incredible athlete. Those guys were really good at what they did. Me and Wyndham worked with those guys a lot. I thought they had everything you need for a tag team. They were great in Japan. For whatever reason, you know, creative Vince, whatever that was, didn't see much in them in WWE. And I don't know. I just think it was a mistake. They were that good.
Can you imagine if they came around today in an era where we've got tag teams like FTR? Man, that would have been, I mean, American Alpha versus Furnas and LaFon a few years ago. That would have been.
Oh my God, America Alpha versus those guys.
Yes.
You talk about matches people will talk about forever. And it won't just be tickles and tackles. I mean, those guys could work, and they could go, they could shoot. You put them with Alpha, man, you talk about some incredible matches. Wyndham and I had a blast working with those guys. I thought they were just absolutely fantastic. Everybody did. Everybody liked them, you know, for some reason though, but, you know, creative, you know, I was always, you know, putting quotation marks, creative events, or, you know, sometimes that's exactly the same thing. Just didn't see much in them.
We should mention that, you know, sometimes it's not just about great bell-to-bell in-ring action. Sometimes it's about entertaining. And when you think about great tag teams from the early 2000s, one that I always glossed over because it wasn't necessarily my favorite, but my buddy Cassio Kid would just mention it all the time, and I'm reminded, man, they were so over. I'm talking about Too Cool, Brian Christopher and Scotty Too Hottie. Of course, Rikishi rounded out that trio. But, man, do you want to talk about a party atmosphere every time they were in the ring? I mean, they were over like Rover at a level that it's hard to even wrap your head around now, but the charisma and the fun that they brought to the matches, that's what it was all about. How was that received in an era where this is the same era where we're sacrificing dudes and we're threatening to do crazy over the tops. You know, we got seances and levitating, and I mean, there's some weird out there whacked out stuff. And then we've got a guy doing the worm, and the fans are just going bananas. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you know, I just thought it was the whole thing, you know, was a variety show. And I thought they fit perfectly with, maybe that's the reason they got over so big, was because it was a departure from all of the crazy dark stuff that we were doing. We were in, I think it was Edmonton, and Scotty did the worm one night, and Ron just kicked the shit out of him. You know, not shoot and kick, you know, just started putting the boots to him. And so I told Ron afterwards, I said, hey, I think Scotty wanted to do something called the worm. And Ron goes, well, why didn't he tell me? He just thought he was screwing around, and Ron just didn't know what to do. So he was out there, he put the boots to him, killed the worm. So the next night, Ron's out there with him. He goes, do that worm thing. And so Scotty does the worm somewhere up in Canada, and the place went crazy. I mean, crazy. It was the first time he had ever done it. And I don't know if anybody expected something like that. I know we didn't. I don't know if he did. I don't know if he was doing it just to have fun and do something different. You know, hey, look what I can do. But whatever it was, it worked. And then he had something that was, he's made money off for 30 years. He and Brian Christopher were a really good tag team. Brian Christopher was massively, I don't know about underrated, because he was pretty esteemed. Brian Christopher was a really good worker. As he could do anything. He could do the comedy. He could do the fun stuff. Brian was he was a funny guy. Obviously a very smart guy. You don't have a sense of humor like that without being a smart guy. But Brian was really a perfect match for Scotty. And then you had to throw in Rikishi, and what a great team. They asked me and Ron one day, said, do you guys want to dance with Too Cool? They didn't think we'd do it. Of course we're going to do it. It's a work. So we get out there. We danced so long, they finally had to go to commercial break. They're like, guys, just quit dancing. It killed the whole rib.
My God, what a great story. Hey, speaking of dancing, one of the guys that I enjoyed seeing strut that ass around the ring back in the day, because it was heat, brother, was the Freebirds. And they innovated the Freebird rule. We even saw New Day do that not too terribly long ago. Hey, it's going to be any combination of these three. It's going to be, two of these fellows. But you grew up on the Freebirds. I mean, that's something that you held in really, really high regard as a Texas guy. What was it about the Freebirds that worked so well as a team?
To this day, if you mention the word Freebird in Texas, people know exactly what you're talking about. I was at the country club the other day down in Athens, Texas, a little small town where my mother lives. And I said something about somebody, and the guy says, yeah, man, that guy's a big star like a Von Erich. Von Erichs hadn't been around for 30 years. Now the movie was about to come out at the time, but still, that's how the Freebirds and Von Erichs were. The kids debuted. I'm talking about the kids, Kerry and Kevin and David, and business was pretty good. Business didn't get hot till Michael showed up. And when Michael showed up, man, things went through the roof. It was unbelievable. I've stood in the ring when Bad Street's playing, and Michael Hayes is doing that silly strut coming down the aisle, and I'm sitting there thinking I could die right now. I'm in heaven. There was nothing like the Freebirds. Michael, famously put 1 million people in the down Louisiana Superdome with Junkyard Dog. Michael was – I don't know why Michael got out of the business so quick. He was really young and didn't stay in it that long. Michael, what a great team. You had Gordy who could freaking go. And most of the stuff I've copied in my wrestling was from Gordy. Then you had either Jimmy Jam or you had Buddy who were just massive heat getters. It was a perfect team.
I got to ask, you ever have any less than favorable interactions with Michael Hayes? Because allegedly, maybe when he has a little bit of that firewater in him, he can entertain himself in interesting ways that don't always work out in your favor.
Well, I was certainly there at the wedding when Linda took the microphone from Stephanie's wedding. I was certainly there for that. And I've never been more proud of Michael in my life. When he told Kurt Angle, who have you beat? Actually, quote on the microphone, who the fuck have you beat? In front of all these, wrestlers was one thing, but all the other side of the family members was, I don't think found that too funny. So, yes, I've had some great interactions with Michael Hayes. He's certifiably crazy. I mean, certifiably crazy. I've called him sometimes. I go, hey, do you know so-and-so? Oh, yeah, and he's got some story. It's one of the craziest stories you ever heard. He told us a story about moonwalking down in Lake Charles one time. He got hit with a ceiling fan, and then he ended up waking up with Jimmy Garvin in bed naked. And he just told me the story. I'm going, wait a minute. Aren't you glossing over a few things here that you just like this is normal? He goes, well, as a Freebird night, Freebird is what we do. Freebird.
Isn't there a story where you were wrestling with the Freebirds the night before your wedding?
100%. I was supposed to have a loser leaves town match against the Freebirds. And the deal was I just signed a deal with Otto Vance. So I was going over to Europe to wrestle for 6 months. Exactly. So I loser leaves town. Well, it was supposed to be the night before. I'm sorry, the week before. Instead, it got moved up to the night before I got married. And so John Busing, my old college roommate, a bunch of guys were, my groomsmen. And so they're all saying, hey, you got to work with the Freebirds tonight. They didn't say work. They said wrestle Freebirds tonight. Loser leaves town. Bass Street match. Yeah. So he's a cop. He ran over a stop sign. And so I could take something to the ring to hit Michael with. So I've got this stop sign in the back of the truck that I'm lugging into the Sportatorium. And I got all my college roommates out there. Well, Michael knows that I've got to have wedding pictures the next day. So he and Gordy, I think Gordy was there. They spend the whole match trying to bust me open so that I can't take wedding pictures. And finally, they got my nose and busted my nose. I got these big black eyes for my wedding photos. They thought it was the funniest thing ever to ruin my wedding.
Yeah, what a sentence. I'm sure everybody was thrilled when you had to deal with that. I do want to ask you,
and I will tell you this, Michael, I came back. I would go over to Europe, and Loser leaves town. So I go over to Europe, and I blow out my knee in Vienna, and I have to come home. I can't work. And so I come home, and I call Akbar. I said, Ak, I need to work. I don't have any money. And he goes, okay, tell you what we'll do, kid. We'll do the old Midnight Rider gimmick. We're going to put a mask on you, but with all the old John Hawk outfit on. So I had the vest on. I had the boots. I had boots that said Hawk on them. But I wore a mask, and it was, not supposed to be me because I'm Loser Leaves Town. Well, anyway, we're in some spot show somewhere in a high school gym, and we're working with the Freebirds. Now I'm not working because I got the bad knee. Akbar's just giving me a payday. So at the end of the show, I've got my crutches because I've got this busted leg. And I'm going back to the shower, and I see Michael and I think Gordy in there, and they leave, and they're kind of laughing. I thought, man, this doesn't end well. I don't know what's going to happen. This doesn't end well. So I'm back there on this wet floor, naked. God. My towel's somewhere outside, and in the shower. All of a sudden, all the lights in the building go off. They found the main switch. Now I'm in a labyrinth in this high school. I can't find my way out. So I finally find my towel. It's so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face. And I'm there on a busted wheel, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out how to get out of this thing. I end up in the social security, the social studies room. I end up in the English room. It took me forever to get out of that freaking high school. So then later, I had Michael in Buffalo with the Hardys. And I came back. He goes, you think you could kick me any harder? I said, Michael, I kicked you so hard a 20-year-old 8-ball popped up.
Oh, God. What a great.
I said, I wonder why I kicked you, Michael. I really wonder why I kicked you. He goes, well, I deserve that. I know I deserve that. Michael, and by the way, Michael would just pee on you. I mean, just pee on you. He'd just pee on you. He wore Zubaz, and he was notorious for just like peeing on you. A buddy one time climbed into a ceiling and was going to pee on, I think it was Missy Hyatt out of the roof in the bathroom. There was no payoff for it. It just the Freebirds were nuts. I dropped them off one time, me, him, and Dutch Mantel. And Dutch said, Michael said, I rolled and knocked on the window. Middle of the day, and we've had a little drink. Knocked on the window. Dutch rolls down the window. Michael just sticks his unit in and starts peeing on us.
Now, I've heard that story from Dr. Tom Prichard's story, from his perspective, because I think Dr. Tom, maybe this is a different story. But Dr. Tom tells me that once upon a time, he was driving, and Michael Hayes comes over, knocks on Dutch's window. Dutch rolls the window down. Wherever they are, they're settling in. So Dr. Tom has put the car in park and pulls the key out of the ignition. The car's off now. And just as you said, Michael starts peeing onto Dutch. Dutch is trying to roll the window up, but of course it won't roll up because the car is off. And Dr. Tom is fumbling to get the key. Finally gets the key and gets the car started once Michael's finished urinating all over Dutch.
Now I'm not going to dispute Dr. Tom, but I think the thing happened with me driving is what I think it happened.
Okay.
I believe because I remember the story with me driving. Now, maybe I was in the back seat, so I'm not going to dispute Tom.
Maybe I was drinking and you told me the story and I thought Dr. Tom did. That's probably likely.
But
that was your story.
All of that's true. He pee all over Dutch. Dutch's like, oh goddamn, oh goddamn, oh goddamn, and he's fumbling for the window like, oh goddamn, and Michael just peeing all over everybody in the car, and it's like splattering all over me too. But it's it's kind of like funny. So it's like it's funny to get peed on. I'm not sure why that's funny, but it's probably something wrong with all of us. Then Michael goes into the hotel and he pulls down his Zubaz to his ankles and spreads his butt cheeks. There are people everywhere. He just mooning us and.
I don't think you're supposed to be spreading your butt cheeks in public. I think there's a rule.
I don't think you are. I think there's something like significantly wrong with that.
I think it's even in the Holiday Inn manual, like if you were to just look at their best practices, not letting patrons spread their butt cheeks in the lobby. It's probably on the list, but maybe you should spread your butt cheeks thanks to Mando. Mando's whole body deodorant. It's Michael Hayes tested, Michael Hayes approved. It's safe to wear anywhere on your body, your pits, your balls, your thigh folds, your belly buttons, your butt crack, your feet. If only Dutch had some way back then. It was created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal BO was misdiagnosed and mistreated. It's been clinically proven to block odor all day and control odor for up to 72 hours. Mando comes in 2 different forms too. You've got solid stick deodorant, which has been formulated and powered by mandelic acid to stop odor before it even starts. But there's also the brand new spray deodorant. It's aluminum free and ideal for those hard to reach places. All their products are baking soda free and paraben free. And you can get a variety of fresh scents like bourbon leather, clover woods, Mount Fuji, or Pro Sport. It's been clinically proven to control odor better than just a shower with soap alone. You see, 12 hours after a shower, the average man's grundle odor is a 5 out of 10. But with Mando, the average grundle odor level is a 0 out of 10. Are you ready to try America's #1 whole body deodorant formula right now? Well, you can find it in Walmart, Target, and other retailers across the country. But for the very best deals, go right now to shopmando.com. That's where you'll see the Mando starter pack, and it's perfect for new customers. It comes with that solid stick deodorant, the cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice, like the mini body wash and the deodorant wipes. Plus, you can even get free shipping. And as a special offer for our listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That's like 40% off your starter pack when you use the code STW at shopmando.com. That's SHOPMANDO.com, shopmando.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Stay fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. Man, you know what? I'm convinced. I wasn't sure. I did think it was Dr. Tom, but when you pantomimed what Dutch was doing as the urine was coming in from Freebird Row there, I remember that was you telling me that story, because the way you told it the first time made me think that you could have put the key in the ignition. The car could have.
Oh, yeah. I dropped the key on purpose. Yeah, I dropped the key on purpose, 100%, because I knew what Michael was going to do. Now, this is how this demented we all are. I know he's going to pee on us, but I think it's funny, and so I'm going to make sure it happens because I dropped the key. So when Dutch rolls down the window, I drop the key. Now he can't get the window down, and I'm like fumbling for the key, and there's like piss coming in the car all over us, like a rainy afternoon. And Dutch's like, "Oh, God, go, God!" It was something.
Let me just
Michael,
say this.
people always ask, how does Michael, get away with all this? And I'm not saying that, this is among the boys. Okay. So for one, we're not going to stooge him. That's number one. 2, we thought it was funny. But 3, Michael's a freaking genius. I mean, I remember sitting in my first meetings with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, and I'd walk in, and I'm a kid. I'm not going to say anything anyway. Michael's the only one that talked. There's always that one guy that's the only one that talks. When I did the deal with Kofi and Xavier, I got some verbiage and I didn't really like it. So the guy I went to, Michael Hayes, I said, "Michael," I said, "this doesn't make sense to me. So what would you do here?" He sat there for about 5 seconds. He had not heard of this at all before and came up with this perfect verbiage. I mean, that's what Michael does. Michael is a freaking savant, like Jamie Noble. I mean, those guys they can put stuff together better than any of the rest of us can. Michael is a freaking wrestling genius.
Well, let me say this too, in Michael's defense, because I get, if you just hear any of these stories in a vacuum, boy, that sounds pretty bad. But it's the intent. Like, I've been in a bathroom with Michael Hayes before after we've been drinking, and maybe a bunch of piss cascaded over the side of the urinal down in front of me. And like, I've never seen piss not in a urinal, but there it came. And he knew I had on blue suede shoes that he had commented on and complimented. And I knew that was going to happen. And now it becomes a dance because I got my gimmick in my hand and I'm trying to pee. And now here it comes. And oh, goddamn, this sounds horrific unless you're there and then everyone's laughing. The intent of everyone being drunk and laughing and having a good time. That's where this is all born out of.
That's right. 100%.
Yeah. So
Michael doesn't have a mean bone in his body. Michael's not a mean guy. He's just a fun guy. And he's crazy. He had the mayor of Knoxville one time, and Glenn told me, he said, I was sitting there and it had like one of those urinals, that had the metal background, where splatter goes everywhere. And he thought, he goes, Michael, hey, I'll move on. I don't want to splatter on you. And Michael goes, I don't care. And Glenn said, if he doesn't care if I splatter on him, he certainly doesn't care if he splatters on me. And Glenn just moved out to the end. He goes, you know what? I'm not going to tempt fate. Here's a 350-pound monster that's not tempting fate for Michael Hayes.
Hey, you mentioned Kane. I can't believe this is real, but in a little bit of research, you tagged with Kane way before he was Kane. I didn't know that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, they brought Glenn in. We brought him into Europe, and we had disaster after disaster. So when I got hired in Europe, I thought I'd send Otto all types of tapes and all kinds of things, background on me and all this stuff. I got hired, and Larry Cameron had passed away the year before in the ring up in Bremen in the ring against Tony St. Clair, which St. Clair had nothing to do with, but in the ring with Tony. And so they got a whole new American crew. Well, Otto's sitting there, and Jimmy Suzuki is sitting across from him. He needs one last guy. And so Jimmy goes, "Oh, I know John. He's a good boy." Otto goes, "Okay, I take him." That's how I got hired. I didn't get hired because of meritocracy. I didn't get hired because Otto didn't see nothing. He hired me because Jimmy Suzuki goes, "Oh, I know John. He's a good boy." That's how Otto hired a lot of people. So we end up with some, disasters over there. So then Otto goes, "I've got this big guy. He looks like Sid Vicious coming in." We thought, "Oh, this is going to be absolutely awful." So we go out there to watch Glenn, who had the blonde hair then. He did look like Sid. He was, huge. And we're thinking, "Oh, this is going to be terrible." We watch him, and he's good. They go, "That sucked. That's no fun." He's actually a good worker. So then Otto sticks me with him. Those were both, 6'6", 6'7". He's taller than me. The Zwei Meter und Zwei tag team. So I have to go to the ring with him the first time, and this sets up the tag team that we're going to set up for the tour. There's Glenn. He was massive back then, as he is now. And so I'm his second. Well, I don't really know Glenn that well. So I'm sitting there in the second position, and he's working with Harold Hogue, Ice Train. And we worked with this ring that was like concrete. I think it was Bremen or Hanover. It was Hanover. And Ice Train drops him right on his head. Just a mistake. I thought, "Oh my God, he's got to be out." Glenn wrestles the rest of the match. I thought, that's a tough son of a bitch. So when it gets out of the ring at the very end, I thought, "You got to be kidding me." It looked like he killed him. He gets out, and I said, "You okay?" He goes, yeah, fine. And he walks the wrong way right into a wall. He was completely out of it. And he looked at when he hit the wall, he goes, "I guess I'm a little screwed up." I said, "Okay, just follow me and I'll get you back to the dressing room." So that was my first introduction to Glenn. And then we had a concession match where it's a great storyline. So I'm sitting in the bar having beers, and I'm talking about how great Glenn is, how great Glenn is, how great Glenn is. This is all part of the setup. I'm telling all the fans this. Well, Glenn loses. But when he does, I'm like pretending that I'm drunk and, mad. And when the opponent comes by, I jump him and throw him into the bar, start beating him up. Well, Glenn comes to help me because that's all part of the setup. We're setting up for the tag team match. And I said, "Glenn, look behind you." He thought it was one of the boys that had him. Some little old German lady had him by the tights and wouldn't let him go in, and Glenn's selling it. This 320-pound man. Glenn looks around and goes, "Oh, man." Then he comes and helps me. But yeah, we had a great run over there. We had a lot of fun in Germany.
You also spent some time tagging with Finley in Europe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Finley was the top heel, and he was for 20-something years. He had one of the greatest runs of all time. Those that didn't see Finley when he was over there, that to me is the greatest of all time, period. Greatest. I've never seen anybody better. You might say guys are as good, but I've never seen anybody better. And so we had two different kind of divisions. You had Finley, who was the main heel overall, but you also had the big guy division, which is kind of cool because you had Franz Schumann, Tony St. Clair, and Finley kind of in the one division. Then you'd have me and Luke Poirier, Cannonball Grizzly, Ice Train, different guys in the big guy division, the super heavyweight division. So they stuck me and Finley together a few times. And you talk about magical, man. It was so fun being out there. We got so much freaking heat. Finley saved me from being shanked one night. I was in Vienna working with Luke Poirier, and the crowd got out of hand. They were all drunk. Well, nobody's going to help me. This Vienna security ain't going to help me. And I didn't know it, but the place starts to riot. Some guy behind me has pulled out a butterfly knife, and he's going to stick me in the back. And I don't see it at all. I see Finley come running out of the dressing room with the rest of the heels coming to save me. And Finley shoves me aside. I thought, great, now even Dave's fighting me. Well, what he was doing was he was stopping the guy from stabbing me. Well, the guy sees Dave, Fit. Fit had such a reputation in Europe. The guy throws down the knife. He's got a knife. Throws down the knife and runs and hops over this fence that there's I don't know, 5-10 foot drop over, and we never saw the guy again. But that's what saved me from getting stabbed was Finley's. Not only it was not just his reputation. The guy ran because of his reputation, but Dave would have stopped him from stabbing me, which I greatly appreciate.
When we think about tag teams abroad, one of the teams I always think about, and I know you do too, and this predates my fandom, but man, I've seen some great tapes. Stan Hansen and Brody. Bruiser, Brody, and Stan Hansen as a tag team. I mean, when you think about legendary runs in Japan, that's got to be near the top of the list, right? I mean, they ruled that tag team division for a long. I mean, just the arena was electric when Brody came through the crowd, right?
Yes, I never got to see Brody do it. I got to see Stan do it with me standing in the ring waiting on him. It is one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen. There's nothing like Stan Hansen coming out romping and stomping in a stadium, especially something like Budokan. Him and Brody together were, I think, the greatest Japanese tag team of all time. Stan told me a story one time. We were having some drinks one night with him and Duncum and probably Doc and maybe Albright. And now Stan to this day, as I asked him about it later, and he says, I don't know if I said that or not, but Stan did. I promise you he did. We're sitting there and we asked him about Brody. He would talk about Brody sometimes when he had some drinks, very fondly. He really liked, he always called him Frank. And he really liked Frank. And so he told me, he says, one day we were sitting there and we shot off Baba into the ropes and me and Frank hit him with a double tackle. And he said, we knocked Giant Baba in his prime out of the ring. And he said, I knew at that point we owned Japan. And when he said that, that was just something like, man, that's like hearing Jordan say, I own the NBA. You knew it was legit. I mean, you knew this. People don't get to hear this. That was really cool. We're all just sitting there just looking at it. We all looked at each other like, holy shit, man. That's a moment there. That is something we just got to witness.
Something I witnessed as a kid that left an impression. I mean, I'll still break it out once or twice a year. I love watching those old Steiners matches with the Doom tag team. I know that Ron is somebody you hold in really, really high regard, and you've got a ton of history with him, and we've talked a lot about that. But him under a hood with Butch Reed against the Steiner brothers, late 1989, early 1990, even into 91, man, some of the most badass tag team matches around. You talk about believability and authenticity. Like, that felt like a threat. You got four badass dudes who at any moment, they could all beat each other or anyone in the crowd, anyone in the damn zip code, right?
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah. I've seen a match just recently with Doom and Steiners, and it's one of the most physical, violent, and I mean violent. You talk about car crashes, you talk about violence. I mean, these guys, when they wrestled, you just sat there and looked at it and goes, these are bad dudes that I thank God I'm not out there. When you look at the crowd looks at a match and think, that's some studs. That's what you saw with these guys. They had some matches that were just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, Doom to me was a team that should have had a 10-year, 15-year run. I don't know.
Yes.
I can guess why they didn't. Steiners to me they were just better than everybody else. I mean, when they had Hulk and Hasi, they were working with in Japan, but Steiners against anybody. People don't realize they had a match with Owen and Brett on WWE television. And you want to know how good Owen Hart was and Brett was? My God, man, they're keeping up with the Steiners. It's freaking amazing. Steiners didn't have a bad match. I remember being in the business then, and we used to get tapes of them and try to copy their suplexes, which we couldn't do because we're not as strong as those guys. I mean, they were that good. They were light years ahead of everybody else. Then you throw in Doom, who was one of the most bad tag teams of all time. Put him out there with that little peanut head Teddy Long. That was a team that drew money. If I'm WCW, I'd have had them with the titles for 10 years between them and Steiners.
It is incredible. Now, of course, we know Ron breaks out of that, and he becomes the breakout world champion of the crew. We know eventually Scott Steiner does, but early on, it felt like everybody thought, hey, Rick Steiner was going to be the top star here. But that crew, man, that set of four was just unbelievable. I do want to ask you, because you mentioned a minute ago you were trying to watch their tapes and maybe you would have liked to have stolen their moves. Scott Steiner was a real innovator with the Frankensteiner and so many other big things. And it felt like, maybe he was finished with wrestling, and now all of a sudden we see Well, maybe there's going to be a tradition going, because we've seen what Braun Breaker has done in WWE, and we know that Scott Steiner's son has been tearing it up at Jacksonville State on the gridiron. But there's a lot of speculation that he is going to get into the wrestling business. Obviously, Braun Breaker is going to be an incredible star, but do you think there's even a chance we see a second generation of Steiner brother tag team?
I hope we do, because the first one was that good. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to be a second generation of the Road Warriors, though. I mean, how do you equal to those guys? Now, Braun Breaker can do it. He's a terrific talent. I mean, those guys, it's just hard when you got brothers that grow up together, that wrestle together, and then all of a sudden end up in a tag team together. You can't replicate that chemistry. And those guys, man, they were such badasses. When Scott Steiner would do that suplex and he'd flip the guy like that and catch him in that inverted like tombstone, I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't do that unless you're freaky strong, which Scotty was. The Frankensteiner and all the stuff he would do at his weight, it was just unbelievable to see those guys.
We talked a little bit about Doom. Of course, one of the other great tag teams that came out of WCW is Harlem Heat. And you actually spent some time with Harlem Heat before they were Harlem Heat. I think they were called the Ebony Experience back then. Tell me about your early memories of working with Stevie Ray and Booker T.
I remember Booker T's big who was the guy that had the cell phone in the movie Wall Street?
Oh, yeah, Gordon Gekko.
Gordon Gekko. He had the Gordon Gekko cell phone. Booker was always fly. He always dressed nice. There's me and Booker. That was in Japan.
Wow. What a great
long time ago. Booker and I broke in together. And, man, him and his brother, they drew money at the Sportatorium. And that was almost impossible to do, because when the Von Erichs were gone, the Freebirds were gone, Al Perez was gone. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have much. Those guys drew money. We knew 100% these guys were going to be huge stars in the business. For Booker to go on and be two-time Hall of Famer and for all the stuff they did, they're one of the greatest tag teams of all time. But in the Sportatorium, in a redneck town, in a redneck building, those guys drew tons of money.
I love the whole Harlem Heat experience. I never got to see the Ebony Experience, but man, growing up, the Harlem Heat was one of my favorite tag teams to watch. And it's interesting to think, with the benefit of hindsight, Booker T is the most decorated wrestler in the history of WCW. When you count up all the tag team titles and all the singles titles, and then when he makes the jump to the WWF, I don't know that a lot of people would have predicted he would have been the breakout star more than a Goldberg or any of the other folks that we had seen in WCW. Just a testament to Booker T. But there's a lot of great tag teams through the years that had great singles runs and tag runs. And one that you and I haven't spent any time really talking about today are the Funk brothers, Dory Funk and Terry Funk. You want to talk about ruling Japan? Was anybody as over as Terry Funk was in Japan ever?
In Texas. I mean, it was unbelievable. Terry Funk is a god in Japan and in Texas. I mean, that guy he's just different. I got the opportunity to tag with Terry. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I remember walking to the Dallas airport after I turned on Terry, and Terry said he's going to retire or something like that. And I turned on him, beat him up, and turned heel on him. And I used to walk through the Dallas airport. Everybody knew who I was, because he was small, 20 years ago, you didn't see guys flying through every single week somewhere. And it's one of the guys there sitting there with a cowboy hat on. He goes, "That wasn't right what you did." And that's the only time he ever said anything to me, was because I turned on Terry Funk. But the Funk brothers, I mean, they were just, I don't know if it's not forgotten, obviously, but you had the Von Erichs in Dallas and you had the Funks in Amarillo, and those guys were as good as there's ever been. Double NWA champion brother tag team. Incredible run they had.
I do want to spend at least a minute acknowledging, we talked about the Expresses earlier, but we spent a little bit of time talking about the Rock and Rolls. We didn't spend hardly any time talking about the Midnights. And you had different versions of the Midnights. Of course, you had Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton. That's the one most of us think about. Later, we would see Bobby with Stan. And, well, there was even one with Randy Rose once before. But in your opinion, Jim Cornette, of course, was one of the secret sauces. But where do the Midnights rank as far as all-time great tag teams for you?
I think they rank up there with all of them. I mean, they were as hot as they could be. And, Cornette had a lot to do with that. But you had two great talents, too. Cornette is – I think one of the greatest managers of all time, one of the greatest minds of all time. I love Jimmy. I don't know how he's not in the wrestling business. Well, I do because Jimmy doesn't always play well with others. But look, they were as good as you got. Again, though, they get a little bit lost because the rock and roll was so big, and you were in territories which people don't necessarily know a lot about. So if they had been in, say, WCW then, which they were later, or if they had been in WWE, I think the story would be different as far as where they're remembered.
It is interesting to think, these sort of what if moments. We mentioned earlier, what if the Rock and Roll Express came to Vince McMahon in, say, 84 or 85? The Midnights, you got to think kind of the same thing. Do you think it was just Vince, well, for lack of a better way to say it, he was more of a size guy? I mean, the WWF was the land of the giants, and these guys, well, they weren't overinflated, shall we say?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think it's Vince being a size guy, but I also think it's these guys were comfortable.
Yeah.
And they're making a ton of money. I mean, when it's hard to get over anywhere in the world. It's hard to get over. And when you get over, it's pretty freaking cool. And you don't really want to leave. And I think that was the problem. Like Steve Simpson, from South Africa, he had a chance to go in. I forgot who it was. Maybe his chief that called him. He told me who it was. I can't remember who it was. And he was there with Fritz. He didn't realize it was the waning days of WCCW, or he would have jumped. His career trajectory would have been completely different. Over like crazy in Texas, he'd been over like crazy in New York. These guys would have been over like crazy in New York because they could work, and they were really good. But a lot of these guys just got comfortable. I mean, when you're making a ton of money, everybody in the territory, it's easy to say, why would I go anywhere else? Tony St. Clair, I think 12-year undisputed England champion, was making a fortune in England, making a fortune in Europe. He'd have been a massive star in the United States. Why would he? He's a massive star where he is, and he's at home. And so I think it's two things. I think it's size thing with Vince, but I think it's also these guys they're huge stars, and they're making really good money, and they're at home. And a lot of guys just, what? I'm happy doing this.
You know what? That's what it's about. It's about quality of life, and I can appreciate that. I really can. But I do want to ask you, this predates my fandom, but I know you're great, close personal friends. Did you spend any time watching any Briscos tapes? I mean, obviously the world knows what a great performer Jack Brisco was, and we all know what a beloved figure Jerry Brisco is. But most of the people listening to this, they remember Jerry as like one of the Stooges or the more modern era. I don't think people realize, man, the Briscos were a badass tag team once upon a time.
Badass tag team. And, think about Jerry's run. So Jerry told me one day, just kind of matter-of-factly, he goes, yeah, I remember I was wrestling Buddy Rogers and Joe Louis was the referee. And he just goes on and said, wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Say that again. Jerry has done so much in this business. He was one of the great NWA junior champions. They put him up for NWA heavyweight champion. There were some political interests that kept him from that. His brother was one of the greatest NWA champions, maybe the greatest of all time. They were one of the greatest tag team NWA champions of all time. Jerry did so much for wrestling when the WrestleMania eras were getting started. Then they draw an 8.6 rating as the Stooges in the late 90s. I mean, that is an unbelievable run that Gerald Brisco's had. And, his brother Jack was, you talk about quality of life. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to go home. And, he famously threw his watch in Jerry's river, in Jerry's lake when he got done being an NWA champion because he didn't want to have to be anywhere anymore. And Jerry has one of the greatest runs of all time. And he's still having that run now with his silly little shed treasures.
When we're talking about tag teams, we haven't really spent much time talking about the more modern era. We've spent a lot of time talking about throwbacks. It does feel like the approach to tag team wrestling changed through the years. There was a time where you saw lots of pizzazz and lots of flash and pomp and circumstance. And then you saw down and dirty, just like Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. But that era of the late 80s, early 90s in the WWF, you had the Rockers, you had the Hart Foundation, you had Demolition. I mean, you could go on and on with the great tag teams that were in the company. But then there's a resurgence on your watch when you're in the company. Teams like the Dudley Boys and Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys. When you think about sort of the heyday of tag team wrestling in the WWF, is there a time that stands out among all the others to you?
Yeah, I think the late 90s. I think the late 90s does. Now, I was there, and so maybe I have a bias that is impossible to take out of the equation. But I think that run of the late 90s to me, excuse me, I'm coughing, I'm gonna die, and Dave Silva is going to be my only pallbearer. To me is the greatest, I guess the greatest, because you had the Steiners and Doom down in WCW, and you had the Road Warriors in and out during that time, kind of WWE and WCW. But I think that resurgence there in the late 90s, I would put that up against anywhere. Now, you had the Briscos and the Funks in the 70s, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic, which, by the way, you'd use the same match for both territories. And in one instance, you would take the match, you would edit it where the Briscos would go over, and then you take the same match and edit it where the Funks would go over, and one territory get one and one get the other, so that they would keep their babyface status in both the territories, because both were heels in the opposite territory. But I think, look, the 90s to me had, Harlem Heat was over kind of by themselves during that time in WCW. I think the WWE tag team title picture in the late 90s was as good or better than any that's ever happened.
Let's talk about the teams that stayed together versus the teams that split up, because we know that Scott Steiner's going to become world champion, and he has a heck of a run as a single star. We know Shawn Michaels somehow is there when Marty Jannetty throws himself through the barbershop window. I don't know why he did that. I guess he was scared of Shawn and trying to escape, but we know that he became a big star. We know the Hart Foundation go their separate ways. Bret Hart becomes the world champion, top of the mountain. We've seen that story happen a lot. Even respectfully, it happened with Booker T and Stevie Ray. One of those guys became the breakout star. But there was talk and discussion that Bruce and I have had on this show before that they wanted that for Scott Steiner. They liked the idea of making Scott Steiner like in the mix as a WWF main eventer. I'm talking about when they were there the first time in the early 90s. And that's not really what Scott wanted to do. He wanted to stick with his brother. He wanted to be a tag team. We've heard a similar story from Ricky Morton, where maybe Jim Crockett Promotions thought, hey, maybe him and Flair for the belt, that could really work. Ricky wanted to be a tag team, though. And we saw in those teams you're rattling off in the late 90s, Edge and Christian, they both became world champions. The Hardy Boys, we saw Jeff Hardy become the world champion. But we didn't see that with the Dudley Boys. Now, I know we did see Bubba Ray break out on his own in TNA and become that single star, but do you have a preference? Like when you think about a guy as a tag team wrestler, should it define your career? Do you like the idea of keeping the team together, keeping the package together? Or is it just natural storytelling that you have to evolve, you have to break up, you have to, that was the story of you and Ron. Like, when you become the world champion and get that big push, it's on the heels of a tag team. You lived that experience. Does it feel weird to shed the tag team partner? Does it feel like you're abandoning a guy? Just take me through the mentality of becoming a single star after you've had so much success as a tag.
Yeah, it does. And, I've said many times that if I ended up an APA member my entire career, I'd have been happy with that. I'd have been fine with that. Never have the JBL run. I love Ron. And Ron and I had such a wonderful, and still do, such a great relationship and such a great friendship. I'd have been fine with that. Ours just kind of got forced on us. And to me, what defines you? I think your career is your career. And I know that oversimplifies the answer, but, career is made up of so many different things. Careers in wrestling tend to last a long time. And it's hard to be one thing for a long time. Take the Hardys, for example. Now, they've split up a few times. I watch them. They're as hot as they've ever been. And it's insane. They're the same Hardys that, older, that they were in the late 90s. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean that in a huge way of praising them. They're doing the same stuff. That's impossible. Impossible what the Hardys are doing right now. And you see the Dudleys, if they reunite, they're going to be the same way. Me and Ron, it kind of got forced on me. Ron was older and he was getting ready to retire. He had a ton of injuries. You look at those matches with Doom. Look at playing nose guard at Florida State. In fact, he bench pressed 600 something pounds. His body had given out on him. I retired at almost the same age that Ron did, just that many years later. So it was a natural time. So mine was kind of forced on me. And so it wasn't like, do you want to stay in the tag team or do you not? There wasn't really an option. And, that was so much easier than, say, a Scotty Steiner, who's got his brother with him, who he loves very much, or, Booker, who's got his brother with him, he loves very much, or Jeff, same thing. That's a different dynamic than what I had.
It's interesting too, because I feel like that same thing continues. Like, we haven't spent a ton of time talking about it today, but everybody knows how successful the Shield was. I mean, one of the biggest and most over acts. It came out of nowhere. And at the time, I remember people arguing, oh, they killed it too soon. They pulled it too soon. But you can't argue with the success those guys have enjoyed individually since. Yeah. And then I take a look at a trio like New Day. And I know that Big E was put on the shelf and injured, and he's no longer able to do what he could do before. But the rumor and innuendo is they had similar opportunities to sort of go their own separate ways, but they wanted to keep the team together. I think there's something kind of cool about that they're sticking together through the end.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm a huge fan of New Day. And I was there when they first put them together, and the writing for them was terrible. Absolutely awful. I grew up in the South like you did, Conrad. And, when you hear Southern preachers, black or white, they talk in a certain pattern. They talk about, in a certain progression. Yes. Dr. King would talk about that. The river outflows the banks. The banks the river flows into the city. The city then flows into the country. That's like grace from God. And you talk about how it flows. And there's a progression for everything. It's a very simple system thing that Southern speakers would always have. And that's kind of how they're patterning the New Day, but they weren't giving them the same dynamic. You had guys writing for them that didn't know how to write for them. And I didn't know if they were going to make it or not, because I thought these guys are really talented, really talented. Everybody loves those guys. And I'm thinking, man, finally, whatever happened, either they talked with Vince, they kind of took ownership of their own, they figured it out, and they became themselves. And you always thought, and everybody was rooting for them. Even the ones that were writing for them that didn't really know how to write for them were rooting for them, hoping that they would make it. Then all of a sudden they take ownership of it. They become these massive freaking stars. And so they've always had their own path. And so I admire them deeply for what they're doing. Kofi and Xavier now is over as anybody is. It's really amazing what they're doing. And I applaud them for that. I understand there's two things. There's two schools of thought here. Do you want to be one of the boys, or do you want to be the guy? I understand that mindset, but there's also loyalty in the business. And there's nothing wrong with loyalty when it brings success. And it's brought these guys huge success, and very well deserved. Those are the three of the best guys I've ever met in this business that I and everybody else could not be more happy for.
What's interesting too is it didn't always look that likely for New Day, because you saw them individually and no one would have predicted the success they had as New Day. But even when you go back to the late 90s, we're talking about all these great tag teams. One we gloss over is perhaps the one that was over the most, the New Age Outlaws. And again, you take a look at where those guys were individually. They had brought Brian back and they had positioned him as the roadie. And it just really wasn't getting over. He was going to be the real Double J and sing his way to the ring. And then they had Rockabilly, no longer one half of the Smoking Guns. They're going to saddle Billy Gunn with a silly gimmick and a silly manager in the Honky Tonk Man. And it just felt like it's from a bygone era, and it was a total miss. But they put these two misfits together, and before you know it, man, the entire crowd knows their rap and does it for them on the way to the ring. The probably most over tag team in the history of the WWF, to the point that if you hit their song today, the entire crowd remembers exactly what to do. It becomes sing-along. It's unbelievable. And that's really not the original plan. Like, yes, Billy Gunn was a great tag team with the Smoking Guns, but no one would have predicted Rockabilly would become the New Age Outlaws, right?
Nobody. Absolutely nobody. And you didn't know?
Yes.
We would see these guys backstage. These are two. When you talk about some of the most loved guys in the history of the business, these are two of the most loved guys in the history of the business. You wanted them to succeed. They're funny. Billy's a grumpy old curmudgeon, and I love Billy. I just saw him recently, and I was so happy to see him. Billy's this grumpy old curmudgeon. He is the character that he plays on television. Road Dogg is like his brother, Brad, one of the most entertaining guys there was. But you couldn't figure out how to get that on screen. Just
Right.
because guys are entertaining, sometimes, you talk about guys like that all the time. You talk about different guys and say, well, they have great chemistry in the back. Can't get that on screen. They put those guys out there one time as like a Saturday Night Heat or something match. I remember it distinctly. Road Dogg comes out and he is just talking the most shit you've ever heard in your life. He goes, Billy, you better back up a CC, son. And he's just talking crap. And we're sitting there in the back just laughing, going, that's the guy we know. And it got over like $1 million. And the reason it got over because they gave him a mic, they let him do whatever he wanted, and they didn't care what he said. Here was a guy that was, former, guy for Jeff Jarrett, a guy you couldn't find something for. You give him a microphone on live TV, not live TV, it was taped, but you give him a microphone in front of a live crowd and say, do whatever you want. And all of a sudden he becomes himself. That's when they were born. And we're sitting in the back going, that's worth a lot of freaking money. And sure enough, that's what happened. And they became the New Age Outlaws.
Of course, we've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of great tag teams today, but most people acknowledge that the greatest drawing tag team of all time, the greatest attraction, the biggest act, the people that maybe broke the mold were the Road Warriors. And critically, they've received a lot of criticism over the years that, these are just these giant muscle-bound guys with face paint and spikes. But the reality is that doesn't give them enough credit for how over they really were. Like, I still think you could just take a look at those guys and they look like they're right out of Central Casting. Hawk specifically feels like he could have been the video game villain in any movie or video game in the 1980s, whether it was a movie or television show or anywhere in pop culture, or just, like I said, an arcade game. But are they the godfathers of tag team wrestling? Are they the greatest attraction when people think about tag team wrestling as a whole? I'm not saying us internet wrestling nerds like we all are here, but I mean, like, in the real world, was anybody as over as the Road Warriors were?
No, not even close. And I don't think there's a second place. I mean, those guys, they set the tone for everything. People tried to copy the Road Warriors. They were first. It's kind of like going back and saying, hey, is Jesse Owens the greatest track guy of all time? Is Roger Bannister the greatest miler of all time? It's kind of like going back and saying that, well, no, there are guys that are running a lot faster now, but their place in history is assured because they were first and they were historic. The Road Warriors are historic and first. I mean, there was nothing like the Road Warriors. Everybody wanted to work with those guys. They were stiff, they were big, and, they didn't sell a lot. Who cared? You drew a ton of money with those guys. There was nothing. And I don't think there's anybody that will dispute it that will say that wasn't the greatest tag team of all time. Guys that will dispute it will tell you somebody else had better matches. Yeah. Did they draw more money? Look, you can have your matches. Go to your little gym, film it, put it on your little YouTube channel and say, hey, look at this. I used a double, triple decker power bombs on somebody. Or you can say, I said Water Rush, and an entire arena was sold out because of it, and everybody made a ton of money. That's the difference between a normal tag team and the Road Warriors.
When you think about your favorite tag teams, I'm not saying a critical list or you got to vote and you got to get everybody's support, just your personal Mount Rushmore of tag teams. You're going to sit down on a Saturday, your wife's out of town, you're not feeling good, but all of a sudden at your fingertips, you've got access to all the greatest tag team matches of all time. What 4 tag teams would you personally want to watch more than any other?
Wow, that's going to be tough. So the top 2, I don't have any problem. I know for sure the Road Warriors in their prime when they're doing run-ins, when they're killing people. The Road Warriors versus Joe and Bob. Those are some of those fun matches ever when Joe and Bob just got freaking destroyed. The Steiners in the early 90s, man, those guys were – I could watch those guys all freaking day. And I think Ricky and Robert against a big, tough tag team. Put them out there against Nikita and Lex or somebody, or Nikita and Magnum or somebody. Put them against somebody that's big. Those guys work great from underneath. And the other one, man, that's tough. Wow. You know what? New Age Outlaws. I think New Age Outlaws. No offense to the Dudleys, the Hardys, Edge and Christian, and Kane and X-Pac, and the guys I got to work with, our Briscos and the Funks. I think the New Age Outlaws. Those guys were always entertaining. Road Dogg would do some of the craziest, dumbest stuff in a match, and it worked. And he would say, babyface aren't supposed to do this. And he would do it just because he knew he could get away with it. He would just kind of like Murdoch. just to kind of show how talented he was. That was really cool. We worked with those guys a lot. Love those guys. They were really entertaining.
Well, it's been really
now, who are your 4?
Oh, listen, I'm going to catch some heat for this, but the Steiners are always going to be near the top on my list. I absolutely love the Steiners. I'm a big fan of the Midnight Express. So I'd say the Steiners, the Midnight Express. I would probably throw in the Dudley Boys. I used to actually troll people because I know there was an anti-ECW bias, and I would ask people who I knew did not like ECW, who's the greatest tag team of all time, and why is it the Dudley Boys? And then, the fourth one, I probably would go Harlem Heat, just because there was so much credibility with those guys. Now, there's some other great tag teams. Like, I like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, but I think about them more as single stars than I do tag teams. And I've even grown to think that way about Edge and Christian now. I think about them more as single stars. But there's so many great tag teams. Unfortunately, we saw some sad news over the weekend. I do want us to at least address that. There's been a new rash of releases from WWE, which sometimes is a bad thing, but sometimes represents opportunity. And one of those folks who got their walking papers is another great tag team, the Good Brothers. I know you and I both think a lot of Anderson and Gallows, and they find themselves looking on the outside in at WWE, along with the Authors of Pain, Paul Ellering, Sonya Deville, Blair Davenport, Cedric Alexander, Isla Dawn. There may be some others that this is bad news for a lot of folks, I'm sure, but man, it is what you make of it. This could be a great opportunity for us, a lot of those talents to sort of reinvent themselves, right, John?
100%. I texted with the Good Brothers last night, according to when this show's being taped. I text those guys all the time. Love those boys. Man, what you talk about? A bunch of 2 good dudes and 2 good workers. They're going to be fine. I know they know they're going to be fine. There's no sense in saying, hey, you guys are going to be fine. They know that. I just text them, tell them I love them and can't wait to see what they're doing next. And that to me is the key. You can do one of 2 things when you get released. And, I feel sorry for anybody, by the way, who's lost a job. I've done it. I've had it happen to me many times for 30 or 40 plus years, from football and wrestling and everything else. Believe me, I've been fired, released. So I would never dream of making light of it or do anything except, my sympathies, and I'm sorry that it happened to you. But this is an opportunity, and you have 2 choices here. You can sit around and hope that Tony Khan picks you up, or that you get picked up by a different group, or you can go out there and make a name for yourself. And I've never seen an opportunity better in wrestling since I've been in it for 30 plus years, been a fan my entire life, 58 years. And I've never seen an opportunity better for guys going out and making a name for themselves. And that's what I feel like the Good Brothers are going to do. That's what I hope all these guys do. There's 2 different mindsets. We just had Brian Solomon on our show with Brisco and Bradshaw. We're talking about the original Sheik. He made $600-something thousand in the early 70s. And there were guys who would work territories that were making good money. Now, nothing wrong with that, but they wanted to stay home. They didn't want to put out the time to go work all over the world, massage these different promoters, work with all these different egos, make sure you're being taken care of so that you not only do a job here, not a job as in losing, but a job as in getting paid that helps you get a job somewhere else. That's a lot of work. A lot of guys didn't want to do that. That's why you don't see very many Abdullahs. That's why you don't see many Brodys. That's why you don't see many Sheiks. You had your traveling NWA champion. Those guys were booked by somebody. These guys were booking themselves. And so it's a complete different dynamic of way guys look at what they're going to do post a contract. And I hope these guys will go out there and make a hell of a name for themselves, because I believe there's no time in wrestling history where it's easier to go out and do something big outside of the big one, which is WWE.
I can't wait to see what's next for those guys. I'm pulling for them, and I echo what you're saying. I think this can be what you make of it. Yes, it can be a devastating day, or it can be the first start of something really, really big and really, really special. I mean, take a look at just the WWE roster now. It wasn't that long ago Drew McIntyre was on the outside looking in. Yeah. It wasn't that long ago Cody Rhodes was persona non grata in WWE. I mean, they're running roughshod over the thing. It wasn't that long ago we were begging for Jacob Fatu to get an opportunity. It can all change very, very quickly. The cream rises to the top, as a famous Macho Man once said. And we appreciate you guys hanging with us today. And Unfortunately, this was our last episode with John on Something to Wrestle, not because he's no longer doing the show, but as you've heard, he's going to die any day now. And Dave Silva.
That's right. That's it.
Of him.
Dave Silva is my only pallbearer. He better get a wheelbarrow or something because I'm fat.
Oh, God. No, you're not. You've been getting in shape, and I think it's because you've been warming up that shoulder and throwing those clotheslines around a little bit. But more on that in the coming weeks. We're having a lot of fun here. Bruce is not back next week. John is back. We are looking forward to talking more about professional wrestling. Is there anything that you've been really wanting to talk about lately, John, that we can get on the schedule for you? Because I'd really like to talk about some of your international travels. We haven't spent any time talking about global. Is there something you're like itching to talk about?
You know, I'd love to talk about Europe. Europe was one of the most unique territories there was. And I spent 2 years over there, 2 seasons, not 2 full years, 2 different long seasons. And it was such an interesting dynamic. There's nothing like that. I wish it was still around. You know, I wish a lot of territories were still around. A lot are coming back, but there was nothing like that. And you had some of the greatest workers in the history of the business that were there and also would come over there and work in guest spots. And everybody who's been over there talks about how great it was. It was just a fantastic time.
I want you to go hit the subscribe button right now. It's somethingtowrestle.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, because we're going to be back next week talking, I guess, John Hawk on World Tour. We'll be talking about Europe. We'll be talking about Mexico. We'll be talking about Japan. It's a very special edition of Something to Wrestle with John Layfield coming up next week. And by now, everybody knows if your prediction was correct. So say it in a loud and clear voice, John. It's a 3-peat for the Chiefs.
3-peat for the Chiefs. Yes, sir. Patrick Mahomes, East Texas boy. We won it.
We'll see. We'll see.
I hope so. You know, I bet on it, but I bet on a lot of games every day. So, it's, you know, if I don't care about winning or losing the bet. I'd love to win it, but I'd love to see Mahomes get number 3 in a row.
I can't wait. We're going to have fun tonight and look forward to visiting with you next week. We're going to be on the heels of another big Australian show. We're going to talk about it next week right here on Something to Wrestle with John Layfield. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus, ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today. And hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.